Okay, I'm Carol Stone. I was for over 20 years at the BBC. The last 10, I produced a current affairs programme that was weekly and live on issues of the day. I'm now with a market research online company called YouGov, and I have a think tank again. We're interested in what's going on in the world. I think the two questions that matter for the future of journalism, whether it's online or whether it's print, I do belong to online. I do watch things online occasionally, but in the morning, my cup of tea and my newspaper is important. And in the evening, my husband's also a television journalist. I look to the 10 o'clock news on the BBC. In what we've got to face, both in the BBC and in journalism, is in the BBC, can we get back trust? Because we've had trouble at the BBC. I think we can. And also, whether it's online or print, but particularly when we're moving to online, how can we make sure that we do still have what the Daily Telegraph found out just a while ago with Heather Brooke, the MP's sort of expenses scandal? How much can we still do investigative journalism?
Trust and investigative journalism.
Is your question, how are we going to do it? Because
how have we got time? How can Mail Online make sure that we can investigate as well as print?
Well, not everyone wants to or can do investigative journalism. It's, there's here, sitting right here, we're all different types. So we've got magazines, we've got apps, we've got newspapers and websites. So everyone's not kind of trying to break that big story like the WikiLeaks scandal. So, I think as magazines, that's what we're invested in. We want to bring complexity and explain it. We want to tell people stories that no one's hearing, stories about kind of bad things happening, but also amazing things happening. And there is going to be a market for that. And obviously, we're all trying to figure out how we're going to monetize that, because kind of print advertising is changing a lot. But the fact is that the appetite is always going to be there. And that's what we're going to do. That's kind of our goal, to bring those complex stories and break them down for people. So I don't know.
I think whenever you stand on stage and represent the Daily Mail, invariably someone from the BBC stands up, at which point you get behind a chair and duck. Look, I think...
read the Daily Mail.
Excellent. Sorry,
Everyone reads the Daily Mail.
From the BBC, everyone reads the Daily Mail. Look, I mean, when you get to a certain scale, you actually start to recreate the economics that you have in print, whereby you generate at some point supernormal profits. So Mail Online is along that journey, and it generates very high revenues, and at the moment is reinvesting it in journalism and growth. So it now has offices in New York, in LA, and its biggest single expense is employing more and more journalists. And over time, the ability to invest in investigative journalism will grow. I think the BBC has the same problem as many newspapers, which is it's grown from a cost base and a mode of operation which doesn't translate online. So you have 1,000 journalists sitting in central London. 1,000 journalists. It's just 1,000 journalists. Let's think BuzzFeed, Huffington Post, Mail Online. Okay, we're up to about 300. 1,000 journalists. So you have this cost-based problem that, you have teams of people who run outside broadcast trucks that are being replaced with devices about this big.
You're off the point.
Well, I don't think I am off the point, because it's how can you create an operation that can super serve its audience and do that in the most efficient way. Now, we know BBC is uniquely funded, but for online players, you have to have super scale to generate significant revenue. And if you're super scale, you can generate enough money to do long-form journalism and to do a more investigative journalism. If you're very niche, you can do that, because the ad CPMs and the audience is more compelled and committed to you. I think the real problem is people in the middle. Yeah. And so, the challenge for newspapers which are along the journey of conversion and a mid-market who don't have super scale, I don't think they will be able to generate the revenues to support the cost base they have, the speed that they can transform.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I mean, I would say, first of all, I'm going to slightly argue against a point I made earlier, which is the business of breaking news. Newspapers live or die by the scoops that they can get. That is, if you can break a story, that's what we do. There's also
I kind of disagree with that, though, because if you talk to the Telegraph about the MP scandal, if you look at some of the big stories that newspapers have broken globally, it doesn't actually make much impact on the circulation. If you go back and look at this, it doesn't actually make much impact. It might have a brand halo impact.
Well, brand halo. But it is brand halo. It's about establishing the brand value. I mean, I think that the issue, I think you strike on a good point, which is, the Wall Street Journal occupies a particular position because what we sell is trust. Very, very high levels of trust. If it appears in the Wall Street Journal, there is an extremely high chance, way north of 90%, 99%, that is right. And if we write things, that moves markets. Now, if you have that responsibility, you better damn well be right. I can tell you, it's utterly humiliating. There's an incredibly humiliating process in the Wall Street Journal of getting a correction printed in the newspaper. And that's a mistake you don't make very often because, boy, you don't want that email going around. You're under a huge amount of pressure. But I do think there's an issue there for generalist newspapers or generalist titles because they can completely be disintermediated. Right, too much of us talking. Let's go back to the audience. Questions? Yeah, there's a lady here. Michael will wing its way to you magically.
If talking about technology and startups, how do you choose what to cover? What are your main criteria for the topics? Is it big names, investment, tendencies? How do you choose your stories?
Madhu, I'm going to look to you.
That's kind of the key question that every journalist asks themselves. How am I picking this story? Why am I writing about this? But at Wired, so for startups in particular, we always cross-reference because I don't think one person can make a decision on how good or bad a startup is or how it's going to do. So we basically talk to as many people around it as we can. So for example, we did a recent issue on Europe's hottest startup capitals. So we picked 10 European cities and we had one person going to each of those cities and trying to find the 10 most exciting startups, which is really hard if you're not from there. So I actually was given the task of Tel Aviv. So I was here in March, and it's so hard because those of you who are from here, there's so many startups. It's like a wealth of. So I basically talked to as many venture capitalists, as many startups themselves about who else they were excited about. People like Yossi Vardi, who's organized this, who've been in the business a long time, and I cross-referenced. So I had like a spreadsheet where I put all the names down and then all the people who mentioned all the different names, and it was like. It's not a science, but I tried to be as kind of fair as I could, and that's how we try and do it. We try and listen or get the pulse of what's going on in the space and hear what other people are talking about.
Okay.
And then,
for those of us who don't have the benefit of doing the research in March and having the article come out in October, the way I do it, does it excite me? Is it interesting? Is it new? Is it innovative? Is it something I haven't heard before? Is it something that's going to change something? Is it going to have an impact? If you're the third largest Groupon clone in Dortmund, then your chances of being written about are zero. I'll give you a great example. A story, last time I was here at DLD, this time last year, unbelievable story, a company called Genome Compiler. This is a company based here in Israel that allows you to compile your own, to build your own organism. You can sequence your own DNA, send it off and have someone synthesize this DNA. And the guy who was in charge of it had this lovely line about democratization. Technology is about democratizing. It's about putting into the hands of ordinary people that which previously only elites had access to. And he said, we're putting into everyone's hands creation. And previously that only belonged to one person. There was something very powerful about being in the Middle East and hearing that. Okay, any more questions? Gentleman here. Wait for Mike.
I am Danny from Blogs Connections. I want to know about blogs in the industry. How do you see it?
Sorry, you want to know about, I missed what you said.
Blogs in the industry. How do you see
blogs? It? Blogs. Who wants to talk about blogs? No one wants to talk about blogs. James, I'm going to make you talk about blogs. Do you want to talk about blogs?
You're going to talk after me, that's good, because I'm not going to say much. I don't really understand the difference between a blog and, TechCrunch is a blog. It's a series of writers who post on the internet stories, and that's kind of what Mail Online is. So I don't understand the delineation.
Yeah, I say exactly the same thing. James?
one of the differences is you can just set up your own blog, right? So it's another form of individual. You don't need a large organization, large news organization, or even a big brand to start being a blog. You can start right now in this room on your phone, and that's part of the democratization of media and, frankly, journalism. And I think that's very powerful. And some of these blogs grow into big businesses, and some, frankly, don't. Some remain hobbies, and some don't. And I think that's great. It's, again, more voices out there, and people then select what they choose to follow and what they don't. And I think you soon realise as a blogger whether or not what you're writing about is interesting to other people or, frankly, not.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think I think the term has lost any meaning. I mean, technically, I sort of write a blog for the Wall Street Journal. Well, what does that actually mean? It doesn't really mean it. I don't think it means very much. Okay, right at the back there, there's a lady, just shot her hand up, right next to you. Yeah.
In the age, just to keep on the topic of democratization of journalism, if in the age of this happening, potentially has the ability to seek truth in journalism become easier or more convoluted?
The ability to seek truth. Corinne, I'm going to look at you.
Well, it is, of course, very much easier to get access to information. When I started after 5 o'clock, I couldn't call anyone anymore in any company, so no information about sales or anything, and now I just look up. So I can sit there in the middle of the night and still be working. So the access to information is very much easier. But on the other side, of course, the amount of information is so big that we also, it takes more time to filter information, to find the right information and the relevant information. So that's...
Yeah, I would say, just on that one, I would say, yeah, I mean, if you think about technology, the two biggest stories of recent times were WikiLeaks and Glenn Greenwald and the NSA revelations. 30, 40 years ago, how would Bradley Manning have got that information? He would have had to back a truck up to, where he was and loaded filing cabinets onto this thing. The fact that he could put it all onto, a couple of memory sticks. So I think the answer is yeah. I think it's just become, there's a huge amount more information, and that information is much, much, much more permeable. It leaks. I mean, who would have thought that we would be reading the secrets of the NSA, which, gosh, I don't know, 15 years ago, the American government didn't even acknowledge that the NSA actually existed. So I would think I think for journalism, I think it's fantastic. Let's go right to the back. Anyone right? I've done some from the front, but I'm just going to look right to the back. No, none there. Gentleman waving his hand furiously here. Wait for the mic. And then we'll do one more after this one.
Thank you. Can you comment on your own personal brand versus the brand of your organization?
Very good question. Right, who wants to pick that one up? Your own brand versus the brand of the organization.
So we were talking, is this one? Yeah. We were talking about this yesterday, and we kind of argued over it, because Ben was saying there is no such thing as a personal brand. Nobody follows journalists. They only care about the brand of your magazine. And I think it's kind of feeds into each other, but I definitely think the personal brand exists now more than it ever did before. So the fact that I'm here, it's not because I'm me, but because I write for Wired. But at the same time, I can use that to build up the brand of me. So it kind of, and as we were talking about yesterday, there are bloggers who've actually done that. So I mentioned Ed Yong, who's a British science journalist, also Carl Zimmer, who also writes about science. My background is in science, so he writes about that in New York. They've all built up kind of an entire following just for themselves. And they originally had blogs on Discover magazine, and they migrated it over to National Geographic, and their entire traffic moved over with it. So it definitely, it's something that you can leverage, but usually it's with the help of an amazing magazine or newspaper that you write for and learn from.
Yeah. It's a heck of a lot easier. There's a reason why on my business card the Wall Street Journal is in very large print, large type, and my name is in very small. And I sometimes think if I could probably just rub it out. It's probably not in permanent print either. It's very easy. If you come from the Wall Street Journal, you assume all of the authority that the Wall Street Journal has. That gives you a great position. It also, you can't abuse that position. It is, every journalist clings to this idea that they can establish a personal brand. But look at The Economist. There isn't a single byline in The Economist. So there they have a very great difficulty. And the reality of bylines, I mean, I take your point, Madhu, but the reality of bylines is the only people who care about the byline are you and your mum. And really, unless you're an absolute superstar, and there are superstar journalists, without a doubt, there are people who people buy titles because it has writing by that particular journalist. Without a doubt, there are lots of those people. But they, for most journalists, they love this idea that we can build a personal brand. And maybe we can. Maybe we can. Right, last question. Last question. Gentleman at the front.
I wonder if the panel can comment on a magazine called The Economist, which seems to be breaking the trend that you're talking about in the last few years, while all other weekly news magazines are going belly up. It's doing very well.
A magazine called The Economist. It rings a bell. I think I've seen it somewhere. What in particular would you like us to comment on? The fact that it's weekly?
Well, it's the reason for its success. It's obviously not because of a business model, but because of content. And I wonder why everybody else is not as smart as they are.
I think
we're not as smart as they are.
I think it's a great example of journalism with a point of view and a way to distill down everything that's happening in the world, in business, in science and technology, and all the topics that it covers, even obituaries. They even have a particular take on it, both editorial in their kind of leader, but even in the way that they do. Their editorial is always the last page. It's written with a particular style, a particular way, which is very unique, and it's very identifiable. And I would say they've invested in journalism more than most of the other weekly news magazines, and they hire the smartest people, and they cover stories which are off the radar of many other news organizations. And I just think they do it extremely, extremely well. And they've managed very rarely to build a significant business also in the States and globally, as well as in the UK and elsewhere in Europe, which has been their heritage. And I think it's a wonderful example for others to follow. You don't necessarily have to dumb down to create a great business in the digital age or in this multimedia age. You can actually, there are different models which work for different forms of media for different kinds of audiences.
Yeah. The other thing I would say on it is, I know the digital editor very well. We used to work together on a paper in the UK, and they have this very strong concept of completeness. This idea that you can read the whole thing. Now, I go back to my comment about the power of the unread word. I'd be fascinated to see how many stories are actually read in The Economist, rather than did you see that The Economist had an article on, which isn't the same thing, although it sounds similar. But I do agree. I think it's extremely. It has a very good voice.
I think there's an interesting kind of tangential point you pick up there, which we're not going to cover now, and that's that feeling of consumption you get with a physical product. If you sit down with your glass of wine of an evening, and you start at page 1 and you get to page 192, you feel like you've consumed something. And there's a problem with many online media experiences is you don't understand what you've consumed, what percentage you've consumed, and if you've got to the end.
Okay, well, proof, if it was needed, that, as they say, that the one thing that the media likes doing more than anything else is talking about itself. So we've actually filled our hour, which I didn't think we were going to be able to. I'd just like to say a very warm, a very great thanks to an absolutely brilliant panel. Thank you very much indeed.